Right, so we've got here today on Byline TV, Alastair Campbell, former Downing Street Director of Communications under Tony Blair, now a communications consultant, speaker, prolific writer. Volume 8 of his diaries are out now, which cover the political period from 2010 to 2015. And I can't wait to see how it turns out. I'm flicking through it at the minute. And it's fair to say a professional Burnley football town fanatic. So it's great to have you with us, Alastair. Really appreciate your time. So let's start on the issue that's dominated British politics over the past year, which is the coronavirus pandemic. So we've seen 120,000, 130,000 deaths in the UK. Why is Boris Johnson still in the lead in the polls?
It's very strange. And I think that part of the polarisation, divisiveness around politics is that there are people like me who look at him and think, how on earth is that guy Prime Minister, let alone Prime Minister and leading in the polls? And there are other people who think, well, I like him and I voted for him and I want him to do well and blah, blah, blah. And I think something very strange has happened to our political media ecosystem. And I know that you're a new part of that ecosystem, but I think if you look at some of the older parts of the media ecosystem, something very strange is happening, where lies aren't called out, scandals are not seen as scandals, and we're living in with this gigantic elephant in the room, Brexit, where I would argue, and I try to be objective, and I freely admit I always thought Brexit would be a disaster, but I now see it being, even if you say it's not a disaster, it's not exactly going well, and yet both main parties have got it over there as an elephant in the room. Well, I think that helps Johnson.
Yeah, and where does this end? I mean, it seems quite dangerous. Over the past few years, we've seen a precipitous decline of standards and morals in British democracy. But where are the guardrails? What are the obstacles blocking this from descending even further into the abyss?
Well, they're very weak, and this is why I get so aerated about the state of the media, because you'd expect the media to be a big part of that guardrail. But it seems to me, with some exceptions, it's simply not fulfilling the role of a free media in a genuine democracy. And I sometimes reflect on the fact, I don't know if it's true, that Johnson is reported once to have said that the reason he went from journalism to politics is because nobody ever built a statue to a journalist. Now, it sounds pretty on brand. But I wonder if he's ever noticed that if you go to the BBC, there's a statue of a journalist outside, and he's called George Orwell. And I wish that some of the people who work there and some of the people who work in politics these days understood why there's a statue of George Orwell there. It's because actually of some of the starkness and the wisdom of the warnings that his work put out there. What do we mean by Orwellian? Well, I would argue there's something a little bit Orwellian about a campaign in a referendum that wins on a pack of lies, and then after it's won, they can get a new pack of lies, and as a result of that, you can end up with something you said would never happen, called more red tape at the borders and a border in the Irish Sea. But now they've got a new pack of lies to deal with that. And meanwhile, while you've got police in Northern Ireland being attacked by petrol bombs, something they said was never going to come back because their Brexit was going to deal with that in a way that wouldn't upset the politics of Northern Ireland, even though brackets, Tony Blair and John Major went there and said that it would and pointed out there was no other way of doing it. And it's, well, let's just carry on.
As you mentioned, there's violence in Northern Ireland, there's goods being stopped at the border, there's seafood rotting. I mean, we've documented this on Byline TV quite extensively. But how do we how do we have that argument? How do we make that case and still have that campaign, in a sense, to say things are going badly, given, as you acknowledged, that both main political parties just don't want to hear it anymore? They don't want to delve into Brexit, apart from Johnson and his flag waving. How do those who are concerned about what's happening really make the case?
Well, this is why it's important to remember we are a parliamentary democracy. And look, even though I was kicked out of the Labour Party, I still see myself as Labour. And I was really disappointed when Labour voted for the Brexit deal. And I think what happened is that they became sort of cowed by the idea that if they didn't, then that would mean that the Conservatives would be able to say about them the whole way through to an election, all these people care about is undoing Brexit. Well, I don't buy that, provided they have an agenda on the economy, an agenda on health and education, transport, crime, Britain's place in the world, and they shape that agenda, then the idea that you can sort of somehow have your whole strategy shaped around something that you didn't believe in the past, but you're now saying that you did, I just thought was not sensible politics. And I said to I sort of sent a few more ranting memos, and I said to them that my worry was that what would happen was that as soon as things started to go wrong, if they did, which they are, and Labour tried to make the case for why there could be a different approach. And by the way, that doesn't have to be rejoining the European Union, no matter how much I might think that was a good thing. But actually, what's happening in Northern Ireland right now needs Labour to be holding the feet of the government to the fire, not just about what they promised and how it's led here, but what they're now going to do about it. And if they're both vacating that field, you get a vacuum. And if you get a vacuum, you get, dangerous people can fill it. Yeah. And so I think that Labour put themselves in a position where they are kind of almost disabled as a voice on what is going to be one of the most important issues as the country goes forward. And every time they do raise Brexit, the Tories are able to say, but hold on a minute, you voted for the deal. What's your point? So you've got both main parties just sort of vacating that field. I think it's dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to be the case that if there was violence kicking off on mainland Britain, that would lead the news headlines for days or weeks.
Well, you saw it in Bristol. Yeah. And you saw it in the Sarah Everard vigil. Now listen, there's a part of me that sort of doesn't think you should, as it were, reward the violent by saying as soon as you get violent, we should put you on the top of every news bulletin. I've never bought that as a kind of an argument. You've got to judge things according to the genuine news value. Now, my point is that what is happening in Northern Ireland is dangerous and a consequence, in large part, of the lies that were told on Brexit and of the border in the Irish Sea and the consequences that that's had. That is on Johnson's watch. That is on Michael Gove's watch. I want this government gone. I think this is the worst government of our lifetime, of my lifetime. I'm 63. The Labour Party is the only party I can see that's going to get itself into a position of getting rid of them. But it's right now, today, it's hard to see it. And the other thing I think that's important I say in the introduction to this book, you go through the last 11 elections from a Labour perspective, and it goes lost, 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 Blair, 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 lost, 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 lost.